Hello and welcome to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Laura Kramer. Over the next 60 minutes, we'll bring you some of the best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage here on Monocle Radio, with highlights from our studios at Midori House and from around the world. This week, we'll look back at how Joe Biden resisted calls to step aside. We'll also discuss the future of the International Space Station as Russia announces it will launch its own version. Then,
previously made up of unorganised and often dilapidated buildings, the architect's first task was persuading local residents to trust them.
We'll hear plans for rebuilding Antakya from the architects leading the post-earthquake charge. Plus,
the Alishan mountain range is famous for its sunrises, so tourists can finally experience the gorgeous sunrise at the very top of this lovely train.
We'll hear about the reopening of a treasured Taiwanese train route, remember the life of an Albanian writer, and celebrate the sounds of summer with a playlist from Fernando Augusto Pacheco. All that plus much, much more over the next hour here on The Curator with me, Laura Kramer. After conceding he screwed up during the first U.S. presidential debate, Joe Biden has spent the latter half of this week mending fences, both within the Democrats themselves, parts of the media which were once supportive of him, and the wider U.S. electorate, who seem to be backing Donald Trump. Emma Nelson was joined by Washington correspondent Simon Marks with more.
I think that, we are facing days of uncertainty still in Washington and in the United States more broadly, because while an effort has been made much too late by Joe Biden and the people around him to assert that he's still up for it, I'm going nowhere, he said last night at a July 4th event at the White House. The reality is that the horse has left the stable. The door is wide open, and shutting the door now and getting the horse back in is going to prove very difficult. You've got Democrat mega donors who are absolutely furious about what has happened. You've got elected Democrat lawmakers, governors, members of the House and the Senate, who say that for days they were asking questions of the White House after the debate last Thursday night and getting no answers, and that there was no outreach from the president himself until, the last 48 hours. So they've got a massive task, not only to kind of damp down all of this expectation now that is building up in the party that there is ultimately going to be a leadership challenge and a leadership contest. But they've also got a massive challenge proving to the American people that Joe Biden actually can continue governing the country now, much less what happens for the next 4 years.
Does this now mean, as we're seeing with the polls, that the momentum truly lies with Trump now? Well,
you have to remember that the momentum was already with Trump even before the debate. It was only in the week prior to the debate that for the first time since October of 2023, Biden edged ahead of Trump in the national poll of polls. That gave Democrats hope. They thought going into that debate, this could be the turnaround moment. And don't forget that Biden wanted this debate. It was his decision. He goaded Trump into the earliest television debate of any presidential election cycle ever. And then the disaster occurred, and now we're seeing Trump advancing in the opinion polls, re-establishing his lead and extending it. And that's terrifying for Democrats who look at this and say, well, if Biden stays the candidate, he's losing.
And the difficulty that we face now is when you look at Joe Biden on the balcony last night for the 4th of July celebrations, you didn't look at him thinking, do you have any policies? You're literally looking at him going, how are you? And that really reframes the whole view, doesn't it?
Yes. And the next few days, as I say, are going to be critical because he's giving a television interview to ABC News today, Friday, in the United States. We're told by the White House that he will be holding a press conference during the NATO summit on his own, not with another foreign leader. So a full presidential press conference in Washington next week. We haven't seen one of those in a while. And they have to be, and every day now has to be, gaffe-free. And it's very, very difficult based on what we've all seen and witnessed over the last 4 months. And the White House has relentlessly been telling American voters not to believe with their own eyes what they're seeing with their own eyes. It's very hard to imagine that after the last 4 months of difficulty, he can get through the next 4 months all the way to Election Day without further difficulty. But these immediate two hurdles, the interview with George Stephanopoulos later today and that press conference next week, ultimately, I think, there is so much riding on those. Any problem during either of those events, I think, will absolutely doom him.
In May, Hay Festival suspended its sponsorship deal with management investment company Baillie Gifford following controversy over the group's links to Israel and with fossil fuel firms. Now, the festival has joined with 8 other literary events to issue a statement about the future of funding. Julie Finch, CEO of the Hay Festival, joined Georgina Godwin to tell her more.
At the time of the festival, we were on day one, and there was a campaign by an organisation called Fossil Free Books to ask for divestment in fossil fuels from Baillie Gifford. And by some kind of form of imagination, Fossil Free Books thought that we were a campaigning organisation and possibly all other festivals. But actually, we're a charity and we're not there to campaign for other organisations. We then were in a position whereby we had a very high number of cancellations, and that's why we suspended the funding from Baillie Gifford so we could deliver the festival for our audiences and for our artists. But we're very clear as a charity around what our purposes are, and it's certainly not as a campaign organisation.
Absolutely. You're there to give voice to everybody and have a multiplicity of opinion. I mean, this has now affected every festival in the country who receive funds from Baillie Gifford. I wonder how the withdrawal of those funds will affect those organisations generally, and how the funding might be replaced. Nobody, individual or corporate, is above scrutiny.
No, and I think it's important to remember that we all have to go back to our articles of association as a charity and remind ourselves why we are here. And we all have slightly different articles of association. So each festival will have its own policies, its own positioning, and therefore its own fundraising strategy. What we've done is brought together a document around the impact of the festivals. And in effect, that's our calling card with any funder in the future. And ultimately, it's the impact that we create that is going to enable funders to get behind us and support all of our great purposes as festivals in our own right, but also really, this document sets out a brilliant conversation piece around why our festivals are important for so many reasons.
So what is the main takeaway from this collective statement from all of the 9 organisations involved?
Well, we obviously working together is really powerful. We all understand each other's organisation much more. We have collective statistics, which are super, super powerful and can be seen online. And also ultimately, we're all fundraising and we're all in this together. So that the key message here is to attract funders and to have conversations about the future of festivals and think about the authors, audiences and the wider piece around our impact.
And why are festivals important?
So many reasons, Georgina. We're really clear that we are part of understanding democracy, and it's important that we have conversations and create understanding so people can bring their own perspective, but also learn from each other and understand their individual lives and also collectively where a country is going. So democracy and creating public discourse is key. Obviously supporting writers, selling books, promoting, but creating that kind of magical interchange between audiences, authors and our chairs on the stages. And we also contribute to developing new readers. And with 1 in 6 adults in England who have very low level reading ability, it's absolutely critical to the development of our country that we contribute to this. It's also about positive change and our well-being. Reading is one of the best ways to improve your well-being, as has recently been proved. So there are many, many reasons why we should all engage with literature.
You're listening to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Laura Kramer. Albania is in mourning following the death of the world-renowned writer Ismail Kadare at the age of 88. Monocle's Andrew Mueller, who had met Kadare in Paris, joined Chris Chermak to mark his funeral.
This was a few years back. It was an interview for Monocle magazine, a section which was always a fun one to write called National Icon, whereby we profiled somebody who was a massive whoop in their home country, arguably not quite as well known elsewhere. Kadare, very probably the most famous Albanian of his time. Certainly it was either him or Enver Hoxha, the unlamented dictator who walled Albania off from the world for much of the 20th century, and was, though it's not clear how much Hoxha realised this, the subject of a lot of Kadare's novels. At the time I met him, he was living in an apartment in Paris where he'd lived since the early 1990s. He was already, quite elderly, and his work, as he explained, had slowed down mostly to the occasional essay. But he was, I think in the way of the great artists, talking to him was much like reading him. He was very terse, very droll, and he did think through things. You did have to think about what he was saying as he was saying it. But his novels are also much about the layers you have to wrap around yourself to live in a place as preposterous as Albania was.
What kind of impact do you think then he had on Albanian society when you talk about that, him with his novels kind of trying to, probably help Albanians themselves wrap themselves around what was happening in their country, the communist era, and sort of coming out of that?
It varied the degree to which Albanians during that period were actually able to read his works. He was sort of banned and blacklisted a couple of times. He fell in and out of favour with the regime, who on the one hand realised that he was a great asset. They could send him abroad and say, look, he's a writer. We're not quite the crazed Stalinist weirdos we're often characterised as, but he did write things that made him intermittently unpopular with the regime. I think since communism collapsed in Albania, he has become a source of enormous national pride to Albanians. Albanians are an extremely patriotic people. They're also quite hyper-aware of the fact that their country rather unfairly does have a certain reputation abroad. So the idea that they have this great literary eminence among them is, it's a real thing. It's impossible to avoid noticing when you go to the international airport at Tirana, that where most countries in the world, most cities in the world, where London, for example, would just have rows and rows of teddy bears dressed as beefeaters, they have rows and rows of quite highbrow fiction written by Ismail Kadare.
It's interesting looking at your piece that you did write for Monocle magazine. I just wanted to read one quote which goes into some of this from him. He says, "It was like living two lives, one as an Albanian writer, one as a European writer. It became very complicated. Was I bourgeois or a communist? The communists thought I didn't like Albania, that I wasn't one of them. I got used to it eventually." Do you think that started to narrow towards the end of his life, given the fact that, as you're talking about, he was eventually revered in Albania as well?
I think it became easier for him. When communism collapsed, as I think the piece also says, there was an idea at large in some parts of Albania that he could be drafted as president, as sort of the same trajectory that Václav Havel followed in Czechoslovakia. He was, I think, quite sensibly uninterested in that prospect. He did explain quite cheerfully that he now enjoyed going back to Albania, but found it very difficult because when he went back to Albania, he did not get any time to himself. He was recognised everywhere he went. Everybody wanted to speak to him. Everyone wanted to spend time with him, get their picture taken with him. I think he did quite enjoy that eventually. But the moment that stuck in my head, he did mention early on that he and Enver Hoxha were born not only in the same city but in the same street. And I did ask, did you ever meet? Was there ever an encounter between the two most famous Albanians? And there was a period during which he'd been appointed to what passed for Albania's parliament and I asked him what he did during that time, and he cheerfully replied, nothing at all. But there was a moment where Hoxha, in the manner of most bumpkin tyrants, wanted to be seen as a great intellectual, so made this great show of presenting Kadare with some works by Balzac, and they did have a brief interaction, but Kadare decades later still seemed somewhat bemused by the experience.
The urbanists this week assessed the future of the Turkish city of Antakya, which is facing an enormous rebuilding process following a catastrophic earthquake in February 2023. This past October, a consortium of architects led by Foster & Partners were selected to devise a plan for the next era of Antakya. And for some background on that rebuild, our correspondent in Turkey, Hannah Lucinda Smith, sent this report.
The city of Antakya was almost entirely destroyed in the earthquakes that struck southern Turkey and Syria on February the 6th, 2023. 80% of its buildings collapsed or were damaged beyond repair, and thousands of its people were killed. But this is the start of Antakya's renaissance. That's the sound of the ribbon being cut at the launch of the new Antakya. A consortium of architects led by Norman Foster & Partners has created a master plan to reconstruct and improve its urban fabric. But this is not an easy task because Antakya is no ordinary city. The complexity of rebuilding Antakya isn't just about the scale of the damage. This is one of the most historic and complex cities in Turkey. It's home to different communities, Sunni Muslims, Alawite Muslims, Christians, Jews, all of them with their churches and synagogues and mosques in the old cities and other historic monuments. It's not just the people of this city. There are people and religions and groups around the world that feel they have a stake in Antakya's history and in its future. The old part of Antakya will be faithfully restored. Architects have poured through archives to find historic maps and plans that detail the dense mishmash of its layout. Although Antakya is in Turkey, the flavour of its old city is far closer to Aleppo or Damascus. It was a maze of alleyways and courtyard houses huddled around the mosques, churches and synagogues. But Antakya is not only a heritage site, it's also home to around 400,000 people, most of whom are still unable to return. 15 months on from that earthquake, Antakya is a building site. There are still places which are just rubble, there are still buildings which are half collapsed. Just walking past the old city, I can see that it's still entirely uninhabitable. That was one of the worst affected places during the earthquake. And just looking around, I can see that there are quite a lot of houses marked with Yıkılmayacak or Devaliye. That means that there's a court case going on, that a decision's been made to destroy the building, but the owners are fighting that in the courts. So, yeah, there's one here that says Mehamilik Yıkılmayacak. Yeah, it means it's in the courts, don't destroy it. Another one says Hasarsız Yıkılmayacak. That means that there isn't any damage, even though houses surrounding it are damaged. The first part of the plan covers the newer part of the city centre, which was previously made up of unorganised and often dilapidated buildings. The architect's first task was persuading local residents to trust them. Here's Serhat Başdoğan, General Manager of the Turkey Design Council, the body which brought the consortium of architects together.
At the beginning, of course, we had negative thoughts for the project because there are some architects came to their city all over the world. They are afraid what they are doing. But we organized more or less 35 workshops, 10 of them with locals, 20 of them together with the architects, 4 of them with the international groups, and 4 of them also open for the whole city. Then slowly they were thinking that there's something good for us, and at the end there is a hope.
For this pilot stage of the reconstruction, parcels have been handed out to different local architects who have each come up with plans for modern apartment blocks that reflect the culture of the city. There are wide balconies where families can socialise under the warm Mediterranean sun, and inner courtyards, landscaped and filled with fruit trees and flowers. The idea is to keep as much of the original city layout as possible, but also to take this opportunity to improve Antakya for the people who live in it now and in the future.
And it can be a model. Design can be an humanitarian aid. This is our motto.
From Monocle in Antakya, I'm Hannah Lucinda Smith.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You're with The Curator, our weekly highlights show here on Monocle Radio, and I'm Laura Kramer. Since the end of the Cold War, the International Space Station has been a symbol of international cooperation. For the past 30 years, teams from the US and Russia, and also from Europe, China, and Japan, have lived and worked together on the Earth-orbiting station. But this cooperation looks to be coming to an end as the tensions between the US and Russia intensify. Science and space journalist Richard Hollingham joined Georgina Godwin with the latest.
Russia is really the key to the space station. The space station would not have happened without Russian expertise. I was there for the launch of the first stage of the International Space Station from Baikonur in 1998 on a particularly bleak November morning where they stood the international media, there were only about 3 of us, on a missile silo overlooking this rocket. The whole place was just falling apart. That the only reason it happened was because of American money into the Russian space program, but because the Russians had the expertise to build space stations for long duration space flight. And as you say, going back to the early 1970s and then more famously with the Mir space station, which got a bit of a bad press by the end, but was a remarkable achievement. And then the core modules of the International Space Station, again, Russian designed, Russian expertise, and still functioning, since 1998. So, I mean, really, that is a remarkable achievement in itself.
So what are Russia's plans for this new space station and why are they doing it?
Well, I mean, it's hard to believe, isn't it, that, given the state of the world, given the war in Ukraine, that up in space there are 9 astronauts and including cosmonauts, cooperating. Russia and America completely cooperate on the International Space Station. Recently, a NASA astronaut flew on a Russian Soyuz to the International Space Station. And then there's the other side of this is that the space station is old. First stage 1998, it's been continuously occupied since 2000. And so, it's going to start falling apart. It's already, they're already spending a lot more time on maintenance than they should be. So it's going to be deorbited anyway, and NASA signed an agreement with SpaceX to do that in 2030. The Russians, meanwhile, they want to maintain their presence in space. So they say they're going to have another space station. Well, they say a lot of things. They've said a lot of things over the last sort of 10 years about their space ambitions, like, replacing the Soyuz spacecraft, which first flew in 1967. I mean, it's an antique almost. They promise all these things. They've defunded the space program. I don't think it will happen. I don't think, certainly not by the time they're talking about pulling out of the space station in 2028, I don't think they will have built a replacement.
And what about the US? Are they planning a replacement?
Not for the space station. So they're pushing NASA is pushing all its ambitions into the return to the moon. So we'll have next year the flight. Really, I suppose it's very much like the Apollo 8 flight in 1968, a flight out around the moon, far out beyond the moon and back to Earth. And then beyond that, maybe another year, 2 years, a landing on the moon and the first woman on the moon. So that's where NASA's putting its resources. But there is a lot of interest from the private sector in continuing the work of science and medicine on the ISS. So I think what we're likely to see are gradually smaller space stations, smaller private space stations, based on the technology that NASA really has caught up with Russia on space station modules. So based on that technology. So I think that's what we're like to see. We're seeing more and more private space flights, more and more private spacecraft. So either permanently occupied or semi-permanently occupied space stations in orbit around the moon, in orbit around the Earth, privately operated. I think that's probably what's going to happen. But NASA, no plans for certainly not a space station in orbit around the Earth, but a small space station in orbit around the moon, they're calling Gateway, that started to build the modules for that. So potentially what we could have is a space station around the moon, operated by NASA, and a sort of a way stop, if you like, to go down to the lunar surface, private space stations in orbit around the Earth, and then the other one, of course, is the Chinese space station in orbit around the Earth, which is getting bigger and bigger all the time.
For 60 years, Habitat has been at the heart of British homes, creating furniture and homeware that seamlessly fit into our lives. To celebrate this milestone, they've released a new collection. Monocle's Emma Nelson wound the clock back to Habitat's early beginnings.
In 1964, the UK was changing. Britannia ruled the waves with the Beatles, the Kinks and the Rolling Stones, topping the charts all over the world. Living standards were improving after decades of post-war austerity. And you might have a little bit of money in your pocket. From the mods to Mary Quant's miniskirts, that little touch of cash could sharpen your look. And thanks to Sir Terence Conran in London in 1964, it could buy you good design.
The type of store that sold furniture was not really a lifestyle emporium. It was something more practical, that you bought your bed and you lived with it. You bought your sofa and you had it for life. Whereas Conran wanted something much more fun and quick and at times frivolous.
Johanna Agerman is the chief curator at London's Design Museum, which Terence Conran created.
He says, I remember thinking, gosh, if they can do it for fashion, maybe I can do the same for furniture. I was very aware of how taste was changing around the country and realised that just like with clothes, people wanted furniture that they could take away with them.
Conran was inspired by the food writer Elizabeth David, the woman credited with introducing olive oil into the UK as something used in cooking and not to dislodge earwax. He saw her bring a European sensibility to food and wanted to do the same with the rest of our homes. So Habitat was born.
When Habitat launched, they didn't necessarily start off with a lot of furniture. They started with those things that you can carry away with you. And you can see that from the early catalogues. There's a lot of homeware, there's a lot of toweling, there's a lot of fabrics, there's tote bags. And even the way that the objects are described in those catalogues, it's quite fun and quirky. So it really speaks of a new way of consuming and being a consumer.
Conran changed the way we lived, ate and slept. Brits ditched bulky blankets, opting for the far sexier duvet. Flat pack furniture arrived, so did the chicken brick and the paper pendant light shade. The artist and designer Simone Brewster, whose rugs feature in this year's Habitat collection, says her whole life was shaped by the company.
When I went off to study, I was at UCL, and when I was studying architecture, we had a campus right near their flagship store on Tottenham Court Road. So I would go past Habitat every day, and it had the most interesting window displays. It felt really on the edge, more cutting edge. It was really contemporary. And then when I learned about the brand, and it was a British brand, and then it's like, oh wow, this is one of our brands.
Habitat not only brought Britain good taste, it also brought us the catalogue.
I actually really liked the idea that they had of having these magazines that gave you kind of images into how the product could be displayed in these really nice lifestyle shoots that they'd have.
I think Habitat stands for design to me. I mean, I have a very strong emotional commitment to Habitat. I was present at the first opening, and every Habitat catalogue launched with a big moment in the year for my family.
Sebastian Conran, son of Sir Terence, Habitat lifer and part of this year's design team.
A lot of the time, the Habitat catalogues were filmed in our own home, so there was a lot of chaos and, lighting rigs and all that sort of thing. And of course, in those days, pre-LED, this was really hot. And then, you'd find transparencies all over the place. And it was a very energetic and lively and exciting time. My dad was very hands-on and involved. But he also asked me, what do you think of this? Or how do you think this should be? He was very inclusive.
Branches opened across the country, and once we could order the catalogue, Habitat was no longer a metropolitan treat. Conran created the Design Museum in London. This is him talking about the importance of its opening.
Well, Margaret Thatcher opened the Design Museum at Butler's Wharf, and this was a great moment when we saw that at long last government was interested in how important design was in our economy.
But it didn't go all perfectly for the Prime Minister.
She got stuck in the lift and it went up to the exhibition floor, and the lift started about that amount above the ground. And she said to me, "What do I do now?" And I said, "Jump." And she jumped.
For a while, the Conran name equated to a Midas touch. There were expansions to Europe, the US, restaurants. British design was alive and well. But British retail was not. The pressure to keep manufacturing costs as low as possible forced high street furniture brands to source their products through the same Far East factories. And critics said that perhaps Habitat was a store of its time. And people no longer wanted to live like Terence Conran. They now had plenty of choice from elsewhere. Habitat passed through various hands before finally, in 2023, its shops left the high street. The stores may have passed into collective design memory. The name, however, can still be seen on the shelves of the supermarket giant Sainsbury's and online too. Dropping a bath mat in with your weekly shop may not have the cool of a Habitat store, but the name is still there. Habitat's head of design, Andrew Tanner, agrees.
I think we're very fortunate. Obviously, with Habitat in Sainsbury's stores, it opens up opportunities that perhaps couldn't travel to city destinations, perhaps weren't able to connect with the brand. So to think that 70% of the UK population can now access Habitat as a brand, touch and feel it in the amazing surroundings of a supermarket that is there to do one purpose, but you're also there to kind of go onto the right hand side of the shop and what am I going to put into my basket that's going to surprise and delight my living space at home at the same time is brilliant. Quality is paramount for Habitat. It always has been, but so has accessibility.
And this summer we can enjoy a taste of Habitat past with a touch of 2024 added. 60 products designed by the in-house team and also with help from industry-leading collaborators. They are a delight. They bring a tinge of nostalgia. I couldn't help but remember just how much fun a trip to Habitat used to be, in a way that a screen or a supermarket can never really match. But Sebastian Conran sought to put me right, taking me back to the idea of the catalogue.
The thing about the catalogue was that it was the first time that catalogues have been shown with lifestyle imagery. What was a catalogue has now become a website, and except that we don't throw them away at the end of the day. It is very sad that we don't have these physical stores that you have to schlep to on a Saturday, find somewhere to park, and then get your product in. The world has actually sort of moved on quite a lot since then. So I would say, summing it up, I think we're better where we are now than when we were. But it's easy to be nostalgic about things, and it is very sad that the high streets are changing. But, we're in a transition at the moment, and hopefully things will get better.
This summer, we'll see the Habitat 60 items on display in where else but the Design Museum. It shows once again that thanks to Terence Conran, we can all touch something special every single day. For Monocle in London, I'm Emma Nelson.
You're with The Curator, our weekly highlights show here on Monocle Radio. We head to Taiwan now, where 15 years ago, the centuries-old Alishan Forest Railway stopped operations after being severely damaged by typhoons. But from this weekend, the entire line will be reopened for service and a new timetable will be launched, to the delight of many who were eager to take a scenic train ride through the country's mountains. Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Muller sat down with our deputy head of radio, Tom Webb, to discuss the news and their mutual love of traveling through Taiwan by train.
Tom, I come to this with an amount of perspective in that while I have been on trains in Taiwan and would commend the experience, they are punctual and clean and the inspectors actually bow to the carriage before looking at anybody's tickets. I have not been on this particular train, but you have. What is different about it?
Let's get some perspective then. So Taiwan as a tourist destination, you can sort of divide it into three areas. You've got the West Coast, which has the unfair reputation of being the industrialized part, which is probably the train that you went on, the high-speed train that connects the south to the north. Then you've got the East Coast, Hua Lane, the beautiful rugged coastline, and the trains there are more regional. They're not so quick, but you do have a beautiful cycle route that goes the whole way around. And then you've got the heart of Taiwan, the very mountainous range in the middle where the indigenous population live. In the middle of that, you have this gorgeous mountain railway. It's called the Alishan Mountain Railway. Now, it used to be a logging route, and it's now a purely recreational route. And it's absolutely gorgeous, but it's been shut for 15 years. Only part of it has been running. Now, I took the first part thinking it went the whole way because as a tourist, there aren't many signs to help you understand how the train works. I ended up being kicked out and having to hitchhike my way to the very top, and I was picked up on a beautiful milk float.
A beautiful milk float.
A beautiful milk float. It was. I sat in the back in the wooden carriage, and it had this beautiful canopy above, and I watched the world from behind it. That's why it was beautiful.
This actually sounds like a better way to see this area of Taiwan than the train.
It is. And actually, if you get off the train partway through, you're greeted by this beautiful bamboo forest. But the big news is that this train route has now gone on sale. It's on sale today for tickets. You can buy tickets 2 weeks in advance, and you can take it to the very, very top. And the Alishan mountain range is famous for its sunrises, so tourists can finally experience the gorgeous sunrise at the very top of this lovely train.
What manner of train actually is it? Because as you have intimated, Taiwan's major rail lines and major railways are very sleek and very modern. Is this a bit more old school as a train experience?
This is very, very old. It's an old diesel locomotive that chugs its way to the top. It was a forest railway transporting timber down the mountain. However, they are going to update it. So the Cultural Heritage Office has apparently purchased 9 new locomotives and 48 carriages. They're expected to go into operation in the second half of 2025, and that is when ticket prices will go up for the first time. So even though it's been 15 years, it's still only about $15 to do the entire journey there and back.
I mean, when you did this trip, and the fact that you did this trip is already making me quite envious, did it strike you as something that many visitors to Taiwan were doing? Do people kind of not assume that Taiwan is among many other things, a beautiful wilderness with, landscapes of this kind?
You're right. When I was there, it was a purely Taiwanese tourist destination. Everyone on the train were from Taiwan, having a domestic holiday. And me being a Westerner was quite intriguing. It is one of those most iconic images of East Asia, this train going up through the blossoms. But up until now, Western tourists haven't been very, very aware. It's always been a big challenge of Taiwan to attract Western tourists. And rather interestingly, because of the war in Ukraine, there has been this heightened interest in the country, coupled with people so bored of exploring their back garden through the pandemic, they're looking for the other, which is why Japan has been doing so well. And Taiwan is also on that list for the same reason.
Time now for a bite to eat. On this week's Food Neighborhoods, Gabby DeVita, founder of DeVita Experience, a tour company specializing in gastronomical walks, gave Monocle's Lily Austin the truly Roman food experience in one of the city's most popular neighborhoods, Trastevere.
South of the Vatican and opposite the River Tiber, you'll find the district of Trastevere. Its cobbled streets and medieval houses make it characteristically Roman, a picturesque place to take a stroll in the day and buzzy at night, thanks to the many bars and cafes that spill out onto the narrow streets. While the neighbourhood prides itself on its working-class roots, in recent years it has become increasingly popular with tourists. But don't let that put you off. In between the pricier restaurants intent on luring visitors, there is a small contingent of authentic eateries holding out to serve Trastevere's residents the best cuisine you'll taste in Rome. Neighbourhood local and foodie tour guide Gabby DeVita let me in on these hidden gems, starting off with his favourite cafe to while away the day.
We are at Bar San Callisto. I would say the most famous bar in Rome, but for sure in Trastevere, but any Roman, wherever, they know this place. This bar is here like forever, I don't know, long time. It was a milk seller at the beginning of the 1900s. Like the many bars in Rome were called latteria, that is selling milk. So those places became bar. All the locals come here for a coffee or for a beer or spritz in the afternoon. So a place where you just come and meet with people without having any appointment. I often come here alone and finish like with the 10 pairs talking with anyone. So I really, there is not just one point to make this place special, but it's a combination of things, I think. But it has its own vibe, I don't know, I love it.
But first things first, breakfast. San Callisto doesn't just serve drinks. Start your day with a traditional Roman pastry, freshly baked at the bar.
Maritozzo is the most typical Roman pastry. It's a kind of sweet bread stuffed with whipped cream. Okay? All are typical of breakfast. Cornetto is an Italian croissant. It's less buttery than a croissant. For me, better, but it's personal. And this one is another cornetto stuffed with custard, so eggs, cream, okay? We will share.
It's pretty good.
It's good.
I love how lemony it is.
There are some in the dough, lemon zest. Also, the story of the name is very characteristic. Maritozzo, take the name from the word marito, that means husband. A long time ago, the men in Rome used to bring this pastry to the girl they wanted to marry on Sundays with a ring hidden in the whipped cream. That's why it's called maritozzo. Really?
Does anyone still do that now?
I don't think so.
Wow, you can smell the cheese.
You can literally smell from outside.
Next stop, Antica Cajara. If you like cheese, a trip here is a must when you're in Rome.
Voted as the top 100 shops of Italy.
I really?
But yeah, it's funny because if you see this list, there are like Gucci, Valentino, and then this very old style-looking cheese place that are really still the same. I have this kind of soul atmosphere with all the family still there. Buongiorno, Roberto. Mr. Roberto is the owner. He's 73 years old. He was working here since he was 12.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
So he's now 60-something years. When I was a kid, Rome was plenty of shops like this, but they almost all died. Just few of those type of family business like this keep going and surviving. But they are still doing great. But just few of those activities still resist, and now it's time to try something.
Mr. Roberto puts together a plate of his signature cheeses, a creamy ricotta.
This is made this morning, okay?
Oh, wow.
It's super fresh.
A mild cheese with black truffle I can still taste when I close my eyes.
Oh my God.
And of course, 2 kinds of pecorino romano.
Canestrato Romano, the sheep cheese 5 months. We can say is the little brother of the Pecorino Romano. Pecorino Romano DOP is the one that we use for carbonara, cacio e pepe, all the Roman pasta. It's mainly used for cooking. You can also eat it like this. Most typical time of the year to eat Pecorino Romano is 1st of May. We eat this with fava beans, raw, together, drinking red wine. All day. Don't ask me why, I have no idea.
Next we walk down just a few doors to suppli, named after the signature Roman snack, a fried rice ball filled with mozzarella, not to be confused with its Sicilian cousin, the arancini.
The classic one is a tomato sauce, beef, mozzarella, so as a vegetarian you can try a different one. One that I really love is cacio e pepe with lemon zest. This is the classic cacio e pepe sauce, but with the little candy lemon zest inside that gives like this twist, which is incredible.
Now for something sweet. En route we walk past bustling fruit and veg stalls set up in the square.
Every neighborhood, local neighborhood in Rome have its own food market every morning, fresh and seasonal. Very important for the Italian cuisine is seasonal product that switch constantly during the year. So every month you have different vegetable, different fruit. It's very nice to go on with the season, with the fresh things.
And the seasonality continues at Otterleg. That's gelato backwards, where the scoops on offer are freshly made with local ingredients every day. Otterleg bucks the trend of Gabby's tour as a relatively new addition to the neighbourhood. It opened in 2018. But with a mix of classics like mouthwateringly fresh strawberry and inventive creations such as cream and fennel, this gelateria has quickly made a name for itself.
Otterleg is every year included in the top 100 gelateria of Italy. It's a list made by the Gambero Rosso, the most famous food magazine. It's like a Michelin guide made by Italian for Italian, and so very special to be in this top 100 list. Now we go this way. We walk with the last, the cherry on top.
We complete our Trastevere tour with a sweet treat that has sated Romans for generations. Antica Biscottificio Innocente is a family-run biscuit factory. First opened in the 1940s, it still looks exactly the same as it did then, with a huge oven in the middle of the room where the biscuits are made daily. The current owner, Stefania, gives us a warm welcome when we arrive and fills a paper bag with the day's selection.
She's amazing, makes my birthday cake every year. Yeah. And they bake every day all different type of biscuit, family recipes, you know, for us, for the neighborhood people. We come here every day.
I bite into a chewy, nutty biscuit with an unfortunate name.
The most famous Roman biscuit called brutti ma buoni, that means ugly but good. Yeah, it's funny because any single of these biscuit have a different weird shape, but then the taste is amazing, so that's why the name ugly but good. It's made with hazelnut egg, white of the egg, and sugar. Very, very simple, but very, very tasty as well.
A sweet end to a whistle-stop tour of Trastevere's best culinary spots. So don't despair next time you visit the Great Beauty. The battle for authentic cuisine isn't over. You can still find eateries run by Romans for Romans, and they'll welcome you in like one of the family.
I live here. I like to keep having this, find a way to have a local life in a neighborhood that is becoming very touristic, but you saw, you know, with people that is from the neighborhood, we have this family kind of approach. We love each other, we help each other, we support. She calls me if you have a problem in the shop, Gabby, come, you know, and we have this kind of a relationship. It's very like family. So this is the thing I like, and it's not possible to still find everywhere this kind of approach. So I love it. Come to visit Rome, yeah, guys. Welcome.
And finally on today's show, a little music. In the latest edition of Monocle magazine, Fernando Augusto Pacheco picked 50 songs to complement the quality of life issue. He joined Chris Chermak to explain why some of the tracks made his summer playlist.
So for the new issue, I selected 50 great pop tracks for the summer, divided into 5 different vibes. So I'll play a little taster for each different vibe. And the first one was the brisk morning run.
Yes, so listeners will be familiar with these vibes if they listened last week. But we're picking our second favorite track for each of these vibes. So we are, starting with a brisk morning run. The one that listeners will also remember, Faye, is not your favorite of the 5.
But listen, I said it's not my favorite, but the song is actually one of my favorites because I genuinely think if I would be a runner, that's what I would be listening to because it's instrumental, it's bombastic, it's electro. It's very good. We're going to listen to it. It's the part of the soundtrack of Challengers, which we'll talk in a minute. It's Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross with The Signal. It's sharp, it's clinical, it's great for a good run. And Chris, you must watch this film, Challengers. I know you like tennis. It's a sexy tennis film directed by Luca Guadagnino. I think I need to watch it again, just because of the soundtrack as well.
I will need to watch that film, and I think I could listen to that music for my morning cycle as well. It would definitely make me cycle faster than I was before.
It's about hitting the spot, about winning the match, or winning the race, or whatever. It's a very competitive song. I love it.
Okay, so we are now exhausted. We've done our morning run. We've been racing through the streets of London or wherever we are. Where do we go to now?
Now I think it's time for breakfast. Last week we had some cosmic sounds, but this time we're going to have a little bit of a smooth canto pop from the early 80s. I mean, this song, you can dance in a club to it, but I think it's so gentle that I think I prefer it during breakfast. It's by a Hong Kong legend. Her name is Dini Ip, and the song is called King King Tan. Let's have a listen.
Heng heng tas that get me.
I love it. It's like a decadent breakfast, if I may add. And Dini Ip, she is a legend. I mean, she's still working. She's 76 now, and she's also a very famous actress. She won a prize a few years ago at the Venice International Film Festival. But I like that part of her career in the early 80s where she used to sing with this kind of breathy vocals, and perfect for breakfast.
I can see sort of taking a stretch, waking up in the morning, grabbing a coffee and listening to that.
King,
that
King
could
work. I'm not going to sing here, but
that was a good little introduction. Well, let's move on now. We have had our breakfast. We've had a bit of a busy day. Maybe we've taken a half day, I think it's fair to say, or it's the weekend at this point, but we're moving to the afternoon spritz. This is your favorite, as listeners will know from last week.
It's my favorite, and I think today we're celebrating the classics. And I think this song, it's from 1991, but it doesn't age for me. I think it's as fresh as ever. I mean, I love her. She is the personification of a diva, and that's one of my favorite songs by her, and it's full of emotions. It's Mariah Carey with Emotions.
This is the afternoon spritz that leads you into the evening boogie, isn't it?
Oh yes. I mean, that's quite up-tempo. But it's peak summer. Let's say you're in an island in Greece that's the kind of music you would like to listen to it. I mean, she has many classics, but I think Emotions is a good one.
Is she almost like of divas? I know Madonna is your absolute diva.
Yes, of course.
Where is Mariah by comparison?
By the way, Madonna is in the playlist as well with the 50 songs, but I'm a nice guy. I know that I'm a little bit too obsessed with Madonna. She's not here this time.
Going for a different diva.
Exactly.
Just this once.
Exactly. But we're going for another diva, actually, by the way, for a different vibe. It's lounging by the pool, which, again, not pool party vibes. It's more kind of chilling with friends, having a cocktail or a very light swim as well. And I think she is, unlike Mariah Carey, which, I mean, everybody loves her, I think Dua Lipa is a little bit underrated. Her album Radical Optimism, did well. I think such a great album. She is not quite the diva that people would imagine. She's very chilled. And this song that we're going to play is not even a single, but it's my favorite song from the album. Very nostalgic. Dua Lipa with Maria.
Ooh, I owe it to you, Maria. I know you're gone, but I feel ya. When we're alone, even when I'm there in his arms, I know you're somewhere in his heart, Maria.
Fernando, I do feel like you're still leaning into the evening boogie with this list. This is the pool lounge, but also leading into what's coming, the evening boogie version.
Next year, I think I should do 50 songs for an evening boogie, and that's it. You can listen to it the whole day. But it's very deep, this song, because she's thanking. Maria basically is her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, but she's like thanking Maria. So it's quite deep, very deep.
Very, very deep indeed. Boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, and all of that. We're getting very deep here on Monocle Radio. While lounging by the pool and preparing for an evening boogie, which is now coming up. We have now already kind of been doing light evening boogies, and now we are reaching the end. We're reaching the sort of the high point of our evening. What do you have for us, Faye? Number one, the evening boogie. What is our second choice for this?
This is not light. This is proper dance floor, high energy, gay disco. This is like extra. This is Patrick Cowley with Manergy. Now you understand the proper evening boogie, right, Chris?
That one is full of energy. This is where we're getting towards the end of our evening. We had the run in the morning, and now we're just dancing the night away and getting absolutely exhausted. But that's how it should be, isn't it?
And if you want to see the full list, just grab a copy of the new issue.
Well, that's all the time we've got on this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Laura Kramer. Join us again next week to hear some of the very best of the program here on Monocle Radio. Thanks for listening.